middle of February, dead period, and you would think, and I think I started this the last couple of weeks on the Blue White Illustrated recruiting show, that there wouldn't be a whole lot to talk about, and yet we got a jam-packed show. Brian Snyder on vacation, so it's just myself and Sean Fitz, publisher and recruiting insider for Blue White Illustrated, here to talk about a whole bunch of stuff. So Fitz, how you doing today? How you keeping up with all this stuff during the dead period?
Well, we sent Ryan on vacation because this is the slowdown. Like, junior days are over, dead period in February. Those guys are going to come back on campus in March. And of course, Penn State spring break is kind of early, so they're not going to have people back on campus probably till like the 11th. 12th, something like that. So, not going to have visitors for a while, but that doesn't mean the action stops. That doesn't mean the recruiting stops. So there's been a lot to talk about. Penn State, I think, more commits than Ryan and I both forecasted for this general window. But I say sometimes that's the way it rolls. And I guess you'd rather have that than have that show where is something wrong with Penn State recruiting? They haven't gotten a commitment in a long time. So
it's been 7 minutes. I need something. Let's go.
Well, that's what I keep saying, is that there's a certain number of days in the year. There's a certain number of commits, give or take a couple, that Penn State's going to get every year. So do the math. It's one every couple of weeks, but that's not how it works. That's not how recruiting works. So you can, stash 4 in 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden you've got 21 other spots to fill, and you've got 50 weeks to fill. So, we're going to have that conversation at some point, but with 11 commitments, sorry, caught myself there, 11 commitments in the class right now of 25. That's a big deal. But we also have things to talk about with prior recruits. We talked to a bunch of freshmen this week, so I'm looking forward to that. That was fantastic, man. That is one of the best things that Penn State does every year, is they bring their second-year players. I know if you watched the video with Nate Bauer and T. Frank yesterday, you're aware of this, but they bring in their second-year guys, their redshirt guys, and they get a chance to open up and talk. And some of this is one-on-one and some of this is group scenario, but we hear them for the first time since they were recruits. And a lot has gone on since then, because that first year is something that is just crazy to think about. Like, it works out well for somebody. Most people, it does not go to plan. And that's when things get fun.
Yeah, and that's something I realized yesterday. I was like, oh, today's Valentine's Day when we put that out yesterday. So if you missed it, good for you if you missed the video yesterday, but go check it out. We had our thoughts about James Franklin, the state of college football, some of the things that we found interesting. We're going to get to Fitz's thoughts here in just 1 second, but as he mentioned, the rundown is chock full of stuff today, including a prediction from him about who's going to be the next Nittany Lion. Darren Akidabon, Final 8. Mantrez Walker, Final 5. And then, of course, Khil Amad returning to the Nittany Lions. All of those, plus more here on the show today. So if you haven't yet subscribed to Blue White Illustrated here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel, and it's February 15th, tell your friends, hey, remind them, we're doing the live show. If you want to talk to us, this is a great opportunity. The chat is wide open. We've got time today, despite all the things I just mentioned, to talk to you. So if you want to get plumb the depths of what Fitz is thinking about this offseason, if you want my thoughts on any of this stuff, you can ask questions in the chat, and we'll respond to those here on the show. But the first thing I got to tell you about is My Perfect Franchise. My Perfect Franchise is a longtime sponsor here on the BWI Live Show. And Andy Ludicky, the owner of My Perfect Franchise, wants to help you live the American dream. And that sounds corny and cliche when I say it out loud, but the reality is, for you to manifest your own destiny, you have to have control of your life. And the best way to do that is through your finances. Have multiple streams of income. Maybe you want to diversify your portfolio, build wealth, have any of these things. If you have business experience or you have expertise in a field, Andy can help you turn those things into the next career. MyPerfectFranchise.net, 404-973-9901. And don't worry about what the economy is doing, because there's always a part that's moving. Even if one part is down, another part can be surging. And Andy has personal experience managing a bunch of different businesses, and he knows how to place people in the right businesses to manage. He was actually telling us the last time we talked, he was trying to talk somebody out of getting into a business, and when he was going through a consultation experience with them. So he's not here to sell you on stuff, and the services are 100% free. Here to help you if you have any questions. Check out the Blue White Illustrated message board or Andy at myperfectfranchise.net. So let's talk about that, Fitz. Yesterday, not Andy as much as we love Andy. Let's talk about Penn State football and some of the things that we learned yesterday. I wanted to get your most interesting conversation with a Penn State football player in their second year from Winter Media Day on Tuesday.
That's tough because most interesting conversation can mean information, straight information. And that's what I do. I'm the information guy rather Nate's the perspective guy. We all know
Yeah.
that. And but like sitting down with some of these guys was awesome. Kevion Keys, Dakari Nelson, one linebacker, maybe two linebackers. Sitting down with them was great. My one takeaway, my biggest like, dude, that was so cool. Joseph Mupoy, Vicky Mupoy, defensive lineman. He is really, really cool. Like in terms of like, this is a guy completely out of his element. I asked him, or when you speak to him, if you see the videos, English clearly not his first language, not his second language, not his third language, but he's learning to play football in that sort of with that sort of learning curve, which is really crazy to think about. But doing a good job so far. Penn State's not expecting him to be a factor this year, and he's a long-term project. But to see the thought, to see the development that comes into that is just pretty fascinating. So he was my favorite one, but that's probably not going to turn the pages of the information.
Yeah.
On a similar note, I think Anthony Donko will, because I think that is a guy that can factor in, can be a starter this year as a redshirt freshman. We don't say that about too many people, but he is putting himself in position to be one of those guys. He's going to compete at right tackle. Nolan Rucci, of course, is going to be in there as well. But that is a guy who I think I look at him and I see a lot of Olu, and I don't like the comparison because Olu is a top 10 pick and this kid's a redshirt freshman, but you see a lot of the cerebralness, the things that go on, the way that he addresses people, the way that he addresses the game, the way that he, just takes, he's got this approach to sort of everything that is really fascinating. And you can see him set himself up for success. So I'm going to keep beating that drum as long as I can, because that kid is, he's got a lot of potential, and he's got even more potential now that he's an offensive tackle. You and I talk about that all the time. The difference it can make being a guy on the edge versus a guy in the interior. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of, I don't want to say scrutiny. That's probably the wrong word for it, but there's a lot of more pressure on the outside there, and he knows it, and he's learned it, and he's learning to deal with it. So I'm excited to see him. I don't expect him to, pick up right where Caden and Olu left off. There's going to be some lumps, but we said that about Olu. We said that about Rasheed Walker when he was a redshirt freshman. So I think he's the next in that line that's so fascinating of tackle development in this program.
Yeah, and you mentioned his intelligence and the way he addresses everything. The athleticism and the talent and the abilities were all clear on film. I guess what we are learning and getting to know about him now, and Javen Williams, I said this on the video yesterday. Javen Williams said his superpower is preparation, but it's not just the ability to prepare; it's also to translate all that information and then use it. And I think that that's really impressive that he's been able to do that in such a short turnaround. One thing I was struck with talking to Kevion Keys, and a guy I know you talked to as well, just generally, these players are so mature. The guys that we talk to, when we have, you mentioned Joseph Mupoy, is it common to be 18, 19 years old and have a perspective on life the way these guys do? And I'm curious, that whole conversation about, I know they're presenting themselves in their best light, but they genuinely seem to have very introspective, intelligent perspectives on the world.
I think so. Number one, I think they're well coached. Chris Peterson, Greg Kincaid, that staff, they do a nice job of preparing them for the questions that might come, and the approach to answering things. You don't get a lot of one word answers. You get a couple of guys that may take some, that may have a short, maybe a little bit shorter than the others, but you get some thought into it. You get some introspective look into what their process is. And I think that is such a big part of being a freshman. You kind of forget these guys are 18, 19 years old, but you forget how much they go through and how much they see and how much they can reflect. And there is some outlet for it. You got family members, you got coaches, you've got your high school buddies and coaches and things like that. But to put it all together and put it in front of, me, you, whoever's holding a microphone in their face, I think kind of says a lot about the kids that Penn State recruits. I mean, you hate to fall back on that crutch of Penn State type kids, but for the most part, it's pretty true. And that's really, I think, the reason that Penn State goes about the recruiting process the way that they do. That's how they fill up classes early, because you can find the kids that kind of fit. And I say so much that so much of this is logic based. Like when you're talking about recruiting projections, when you're talking about guys that you think are going to end up in Penn State's class, well, a lot of times the guys that you identify early as potential guys that end up in the class are the guys that end up in the class. I mean, even if it takes it a little longer. I mean, you saw Liam Andrews last year. We were saying from the start, this is a kid that really fits what Penn State likes to do. Eventually, Jalen Harvey got around to it, even though there were so many twists in that roller coaster. But you see the type of kid, you write the same script with different names sort of every cycle. And you can, I don't want to say compartmentalize the guys that take after the other guys. But a couple of weeks ago on the site, I wrote about, hey, this guy's recruitment or this guy's as a prospect reminds me of this guy. And a lot of those guys end up at Penn State. So I think it's all part of that. And it's all part of that. And there are great kids that go everywhere. Like there are great kids that go to Ohio State. There are great kids that go to Michigan and Alabama and these places that, some people want to believe that it's just football and it's just anything. But like Penn State recruits a certain type of kid. And by the time they get to sign or by the time they get to the end of their first year, some of that stuff is weeded out. So that's kind of my perspective on that. And you see that when you talk to a Mason Robinson, when you talk, we talked to Cam Wallace the other day, there are some really cool stories to be shared. And these guys, I think, have the perspective and have done that.
Chen Yifeng in the chat asks, any read between the lines on James Franklin's comments on his coordinators? It's something I touched on briefly yesterday in the video. We talked about this. Yes, I absolutely think that's super important because he mentioned it, I think, twice, talking first about their goals for the spring and then talking about Tom Allen and his fit with Penn State and the defense overall. So what was your opinion on his comments there, talking about having to fit the coordinators to Penn State and making sure that they're doing what's in the best interest of the program and not just installing their offense and starting from scratch, essentially?
I mean, that's what you got to do, because this is a personality fit. I mean, this is a football program. This is a university, but this is a personality fit. Not everybody is made for Penn State, and Penn State is not made for everybody. And that extends to coaches as well. And sometimes, James Franklin's not batting 1,000 on his hires, but he's done a pretty good job of finding the guys that fit. Now, it'll be interesting. I think the thing that leads that sort of parallels with this conversation is you look at that defense. Okay, Tom Allen, I don't want to say famously, but Tom Allen has leaned on a 4-2-5 defense because it is versatile. That fifth defensive back can be the outside linebacker, whatever. Penn State's got a lot of linebackers and a lot of good linebackers. And how do you fit this 4-2-5 system in with Tony Rojas? How do you fit that in with KJ Winston and Jalen Reed as potential guys that could play that fifth spot that are rovers, essentially? Like, that is the sort of the fascinating thing. And you're going to keep the linebacker spots, but at the same time, you're not going to always fall back on the traditional 4-3 that we're used to seeing at Penn State. So I think that's sort of how you look at that. And of course, on offense, it's different because you don't have, I don't think, the tools to work with. And that's not a shot at the offensive guys, more of a hat tip to the defensive depth that they've been able to develop, and the way that they've been able to play so many guys and get them ready for this. I went over the defense earlier this week when I was looking at some of the winter workout stuff. And it's like, hey, this guy has a chance to be really good, but also he played quite a bit last year and was okay there. And so I think you get a lot of that on the defensive side of the ball. You're going to have more questions about it on offense. Andy, we're not measuring here, but Andy's got so much more work ahead of him to get where he needs to get. And of course, at Penn State, you can usually fall back on having a good defense. Offense, not so much.
Yeah. And something that I found watching Andy Kotelnicki's offense at Kansas, first off, it's difficult because the Big 12 is very different. I texted you one day, I was watching Oklahoma State. I'm like, I don't know what to take from this because these safeties are awful. I see similar defenses, and I see safeties react in a way that in the Big Ten, absolutely never going to happen. The way that some of these, I don't know if it's being taught differently. I don't know if the talent level is different or whatever it is. There's certain things on film from the drop back passing game specifically that I'm like, I don't know how this translates. But the main thing I've come to realize and watch is that Kotelnicki's offense looked a lot like Mike Yurcich's. There's a lot of similarities of what they were doing and how they were doing it in certain areas. Now, we've covered some of the big differences over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, but the passing game, if James Franklin's talking about fitting it to Penn State, it fits pretty well already given what they were doing. So that, to me, you're right. I think the offense and how they adapt everything, that's going to be the story to me of 2023. excuse me, 2024. Because if they can get up to speed and they can, Andy Kotelnicki is good enough at adapting his offense to suit the needs of his client, right? So like if he's building a meal and the person who's going to eat the meal is James Franklin, then I think he's capable of doing that. But how close and how quickly can they get all that translated? As Franklin talked about yesterday, it's what they've been doing in February, building the new Penn State offense, defense, and special teams. And I think especially offensively, that's going to be the biggest thing that determines their success and failure this coming season, because you're right, the defense, it's going to be good.
Yeah.
They've got a lot of really good football players.
And it's kind of, if you're a fan of European soccer, you know that the style played in England is different than the style played in Germany and in Spain and in France. But like at the same time, you have Champions League teams, you have champions that come from each different style of football. There's no right way to do this. And you even saw that in the NFL this year. There's no right way to go about this, but the successful way will bubble to the top. And are they going to be successful on offense? I don't know. But they have some pieces in position, at least from a coaching perspective, to maybe give a different angle on that.
Some news this week, and we're going to get into the Penn State recruiting news side of this. There's some off the field stuff, but I think if we don't get to this immediately, Fitz, people are going to riot. You put in an RPM pick this week for Penn State to land another Nittany Lions. So who is it, and what do you want to reveal at this point in the process?
Yeah, I mean, the popular topic this offseason in 2025 recruiting has been, 24 recruiting on campus, whatever you want to go, whichever direction you want to go, has been wide receiver. I mean, there's been no doubt about that. It's something we get from the chat here every time, basically, is like wide receiver targets and why haven't they landed any yet? I think they're getting close. And I think it's a guy that makes a lot of sense. Lyric Samuel, the talented wide receiver from New York. He's been on campus 7 times in the last year, and actions versus words. The words are pretty good too, but the actions versus words would seem to side with Penn State on this one. Seems like something could be coming soon. We will keep an eye on that one. But this is a guy that's made sense for a long time. 6'3.5", 175 pounds, somewhere in there. Ran 4.56 at camp last year. And as we've talked about with taller guys, we talked about this with Andrew Olish, the tight end from Southern Lehigh. Getting moving that fast, whether it be shuttle, whether it be 40, at that size, not easy to do. So a 4.56 for a guy that's 6'3.5", pretty darn impressive. So
and lean, a guy that can get more explosive too, I think, right?
I think so. I mean, he's 170 pounds. He's 6'3.5". He's 170 pounds. I would think there's some space to fill out there, and not fill out in the space where you're going to get slower as you approach 200 pounds or whatever like that. That's a big frame to work on. And if you've got that athletic base to work with, and Malik Mega is probably an example of this. Like Malik Mega is very fast. You see that on his gunner thing, but he has also, sort of bulked up since he's gotten here, and he hasn't lost that speed. I think it's a sort of a misnomer when you take a look at college football. And I know some guys have slowed down when they've added the weight, but 6'3.5", 170. There's a lot of room to play there. So I'm interested to see what he looks like in a couple of years. I think he'll look like that in a blue and white jersey. So I think Penn State's is. I don't want to say but it's the logical fit when you take a look at he camped twice last year. He came to the blue white game. He came to the West Virginia game. Don't think he was able to make it to the whiteout, but the West Virginia game, call it a pseudo whiteout, and then he was here a couple of weeks ago. So he's a guy I think that makes a lot of sense for Penn State. I think Penn State makes a lot of sense for him. He's close with Josiah Brown. He's not related to Curtis Samuel, which is the thing we keep running up against guys in the 25 class. This guy, is he related to this guy? And I don't. And I'm going to say no because I've been told no, but I'm just going to say I don't believe he's related to Curtis Samuel, who was also a star at Erasmus Hall. So Penn State getting into E-Hall has been one of the best programs in New York City the last several years. I believe 5 straight city championships. Danny Landberg has sent a bunch of guys to a bunch of different places. Penn State has not been one of the main benefactors of that, but Lyric Samuel is a guy that makes a lot of sense for Penn State. I put in a pick this week.
He reminds me a little bit, just watching there on the highlights, of the Egan Boyer of this class. Super big, huge frame to grow into and a lot of talent. But then, you know, the growing into part is going to determine a lot of how all of that shapes out.
And
So
he's
just
gonna come from New York City. So like
Mhm.
throw our stereotype hats on here. He's not going to be a refined receiver coming out of New York. There's
Yeah.
not too many of those that do it, but he's got a lot of tools to work with. And you know, I think he'll be okay. I think he'd be a good player. It was funny because I talked to Charles Power yesterday. I said, hey, this is a kid that needs to be looked at. Soon, preferably. And by the afternoon, he had a 91 4-star rating from on 3. He was probably one of these guys. Actually, in my head, I do these ratings in my head that never make it to the site and things like that. I thought 89, 90, but a guy that's got potential to rise. I know we
Yeah.
haven't said that about everybody that's come through the last couple of weeks, but I think he's a guy that definitely has potential to rise. I think he's a good player.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to phrase it. Kind of compare and contrast what Penn State's done so far to what you see here on film. Another guy that Penn State has is in the news with Darren Akinabon, top defensive end in this cycle. He released a final 8. Penn State is a part of that. What can you tell us about this recruitment and the what we might see here from Dion Barnes and another top defensive end recruit?
I'm going to stop you and say I don't think he's a defensive end. He's
Okay,
a
good. I thought
big
that
kid.
too.
He is a big kid. He is legitimately 6'5". He came to the Rutgers game, I believe, the Penn State Rutgers game, I believe, is 240 pounds. Hey, man, nature's going to win this one, and he's going to be an interior prospect, or he's going to be a 3-4 end prospect. I know Georgia is really high on his list, and Georgia is really high on him as well. So
Yeah.
if I'm handicapping this one, the Bulldogs are the team to beat. But this is one of Penn State's top targets. This is a guy we talked about on the site yesterday. Among the defensive linemen, we call him defensive lineman now. Defensive tackle makes sense a lot for this kid, and he's got a lot working for him. Came to camp last year, and he's a pup, man. He is a big kid, large, extremities, long arms, and things like that. So there's a lot to like about the way that he is growing and the way that he's playing while he's still growing. But yeah, I think he's an interior guy. Again, one of Penn State's top targets on the defensive side of the ball. But the competition is stiff. Mentioned Georgia. Anytime that you mention Georgia, whether it's with a Jersey kid, a Georgia kid, whatever, hey, that's gonna be some tough competition. So
Especially on the D line where they have churned
they've
first
done
round
okay.
picks.
Yeah, I don't know if you picked up on that, but they've done
Yeah.
okay. So it's an interesting prospect, but yeah, it's gonna be a fight to get him back on campus. To get him in for an official top 8 is great, but you want to be top 1 eventually, and that's a long ways away.
Yeah, and of course you can check that out on 3 Blue White Illustrated, and of course this was ch who had this one? I
Oh, Ted,
apologize. I just
sorry, I
Pat
wasn't
Simmons,
sure where you were
thank
going
you.
with there. Yeah.
You mentioned official visit, trying to get the summertime decision. So one of these guys at the top prospect, where we've mentioned the class, they've added a lot of guys in this class that are regional fits that make a lot of sense for this roster. And here's a guy who sky high potential, summertime decision, some of those things, just to kind of refer back to a conversation we had previously of here are the guys Penn State's attacking in this class that have those high end pedigrees to go with the guys that maybe are underrated or they think are really solid football players to add.
And defensive tackle, not a huge need this cycle. You always want defensive tackles. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Big guys that can move are hard to come by, and that's why Georgia's shopping in New Jersey. That's kind of how that all works. But no, this is a situation where you took probably 4 last year. So like, even though things are going to clear out after this season, because Beeman's going to be out, Ellie's going to be out, because Izzard's probably going to be out. Like there is work to do after the season, but that doesn't really have much to do with the class of 2025. So it's not a huge need, but Penn State wants to get a top 1, 2 top ones, whatever they go with here.
Yeah. What do you think about Mantrez Walker, another guy that had Penn State in his top schools? 5'11" linebacker, great tape. We can put it on for you here. What's the fit? What's the relationship between Mantrez Walker and the Nittany Lions?
Yeah, heck of a high school player. He came to Penn State for, I think, 2 visits. One was before he committed to Michigan the first time around. He's no longer in Michigan's class, but Penn State has been in contact there. I have a tough time because you look at this class and there's 2.5, 3 linebackers in this class so far, depending what you want to do with Deshaun Burnett. And that's, it's going to be tough to work around that. And they still have some targets that they're going after there as well. So I think Penn State probably not the eventual destination for Mantrez Walker, but he's been very vocal about his interest in the Nittany Lions.
So we'll see how that one plays out as well. I know we've talked about Penn State interested if they can add another linebacker, they want to add another linebacker with speed, athleticism. So the door open, but also it's going to have to be the right fit. One of the interesting things that I want to get to today, and this is going into the business side of things. Not quite sure where to start, but we're going to be talking about all of that stuff from here to the end of the show, which is something I'm interested to get your opinion on. So we'll just start with this graphic here. This is from Blair Sanderson on an On3. I believe he's for the Iowa site. He put together a list of all of the offers that have gone out in 2025. This was, I think, from a week ago. So these numbers are probably even up from this, but you can see Penn State number 3 in total offers for 2025. We know here on the recruiting show they send out a ton of offers, but I think this puts it in perspective how many offers Penn State has been putting out, which is to go into the chat. And Spencer Code asks, we talked about recruiting more for the transfer portal, 355 players recruited. How do you view this, and how do you think this is helping Penn State? How do you think that this is helping them keep pace in the crazy world of NIL recruiting?
Offers get attention. Like that's what we're looking at here. And you look at the schools that are involved here: Pittsburgh, West Virginia, Penn State, Tennessee, Boston College, Louisville, Michigan State. So for the most part, you throw Tennessee in there. Tennessee's always offered a ton of kids, but for the most part, northern schools who need to catch the attention of southern prospects, Florida kids, Texas kids, maybe some California kids as well, overgeneralizing here, Georgia as well. But get the attention of those guys to get them on campus. And on top of that, I would say a quarter of these offers, that's rough math on my head, and I'm not a math guy, gone to wide receivers and all over the country. So this is what we're looking at here. And I tell you what, that's a big gap between number 1 and 2, Pittsburgh and West Virginia, and Penn State, 355. It's been going that direction for a long time, but these are attention getters. These are ones that, you go into a school in South Florida and you may offer 4 or 5 kids. All 4 of the 5 of those kids are not going to play at Penn State. All 4 of those 5 kids probably can't play at Penn State, but you got to be there. You got to be a presence. And the way that Penn State's recruiting, I don't have the Florida numbers in front of me, but usually that's the state that leads the way in terms of offers. But that's my take on it. Just get their attention, try and get them up, try and get them for visits and things like that. And, they've brought in some guys, or I don't want to say brought in some guys, but some guys have visited from out of the region that also fit in that category. They probably aren't going to go to Penn State. I'll be interested to see if the photo shoot ban, how the things are changing, and I'm curious to see the final verbiage on that rule. If that's going to impact the number of, I don't want to say that type of kid, but like kids from out of the region that are going to visit Penn State to have that experience, to have that lasting memory of them in the blue and white jerseys and things like that. Maybe you're not really considering Penn State, but you still want to check it out because it's a cool thing to hang on your wall or put on your Instagram or whatever. I'm curious to see if that chips into it. I'm not saying it's going to, change everything entirely, but it could chip into the numbers of those guys that eventually visit. Those are expensive photo shoots when you take into account flights and things like that, lodging and things like that. But it's definitely real. Like this is not a situation where we're fabricating that kids are appealed. Part of Penn State's appeal is some of the cool stuff that they do as a recruiting staff, some of the cool stuff that they do as a graphic staff and things like that. But it's just all very interesting, and those are going to end like I guess that you could technically say they're done now because they're March 1st, I think, is the date where that comes into play or goes out.
It's a huge bummer, by the way. From nobody cares helpful to whine on YouTube, but it's super helpful to have all of those photos out there in the world to create cool thumbnails that people want to click on.
I'll tell you what, they're going to try and work around it. Everybody's going to try and work around it. Like these rules are, I would say, well-intentioned, but the execution, the NCAA, if you can believe this is a thing, like the NCAA may have not completely thought this out. So it will be interesting to see how they find the loophole, how they get around it, because those are conversations that are happening at Lash. Those are conversations that are happening at Ohio State, at Alabama, everywhere. How do we keep the appeal of the visit? How do we give them a lasting impression for this visit? Because that's the thing. When you think about Penn State, you're going to think about yourself in that helmet. You're going to think about yourself, doing the poses and everything like that. And it's a valuable recruiting tool, and it's not going to be able to be used anymore.
Let's get to Khil Amad. Left for Syracuse and officially reported yesterday, although BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, we had this earlier than that he's returning to the Nittany Lions. So what do you make of the whole saga this offseason? And then we can get into kind of his importance to the program.
Didn't work out at Syracuse. I thought it was a big deal. Like when he left, like he is an influential guy. He is a guy that was one of the points on Lyric Samuel, and I think that's I don't want to say because he's coming back, Penn State will eventually get Lyric Samuel, but I think there's some correlation there. So we'll go with that. But it's beyond New Jersey, but it's mostly centered in New Jersey. Penn State has not done well in New Jersey. Now they have 3 commits for New Jersey. It's not a coincidence here. So I think that there's a lot to like about the way that he has recruited. I know that he went to Syracuse. From what I understand, did not hit it off with Fran Brown like many thought they would. He was familiar with the location and the digs up there, but Penn State was we'll say a different option. And I think that's going to help Penn State. This group, the continuity in this group where you've got Kenny Sanders and that whole crew, Alan Zamitis, and I don't want to leave anybody out, but that recruiting staff works extremely well together. And we saw a couple of cycles ago, there was a recruiting staff in town that had some, good recruiters on it, had some good guys on it. They weren't as fluid as this unit. And I think this unit has done a really nice job, especially when they get kids on campus. So getting him back in the fold, you saw the sort of the welcome that he got back from those other staff recruiting members. So, that's certainly going to help. It's going to continue to help in Jersey. It's going to continue to help in the Northeast. Like I hate pigeonholing him to New Jersey. Like if you ask Khil, he's not just New Jersey. He's been an influential figure around the Northeast. So we're going to see how that happens. And then they're going to bump Jordan Lucas, former Penn State corner, Super Bowl champion, I believe. He was in he wants to get into coaching. And oftentimes when you have to get into coaching as a young player, former player, something like that, recruiting is the first step. So he stepped into that role, but things opened up. Bryce Jones is now the cornerbacks coach at Northern Iowa. Congratulations to him for getting that first full-time job. But that opened it up for him to go to GA. That opened it up for Khil to come back in. All nicely wrapped up in a nice, neat package for Penn State. So very cool to get him back. And I think it improves the continuity, which if in any industry is going to really help them.
Yeah. So just to button this up, a huge win for Penn State to continue some of the strides they've been making regionally to really lock down areas that they hadn't previously. So again, you mentioned not just New Jersey, but also the Northeast, where Penn State has been getting better and better. And I think doing an excellent job in New England, specifically finding guys in that area. That kind of leads us to the next conversation. Frank Badani of the York Daily Record wrote this, and I apologize for reading on the internet, but I think that this is just interesting to put out here, and I want everyone to have the same information. Recruiting played a part in the spending rise, too, talking about Penn State's athletic budget blossoming under Pat Kraft in the last year. The athletic department's overall recruiting budget increased 51%, nearly $4.8 million. Meanwhile, Penn State's football impressive recruiting consistency continued, but did not elevate in the past 2 cycles, leading to kind of the same spot that they've been in over the last couple of years. So I'm interested in your opinion here on that. Penn State spending a lot of spending more money to maintain a level of consistency. Is that the price of doing business in the NIL world? Is that an investment in something that's going to grow to keep Khil Amad, after losing him? How do you view the expenditure versus everything we just talked about, from the offers that have gone out to the personnel and trying to get Penn State to a place where they're trying to get into that top 10, top 5 in recruiting?
It is the price of doing business, not with NIL though, because these numbers don't reflect NIL, and actually probably don't reflect much in terms of what.
I apologize. I just meant in order to have resources to battle against those attritions. Where before it was about relationships. Now you're going to lose guys just because of that, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. It's the price of doing business. I think you can stop there before you get into NIL. It's everything's more expensive. Travel, the way that they sort of pound the pavement and get out there and go, the way that they have reinvested in. I think a lot of it's reinvestment, and that's the thing to get around. It's like you're making more money, you're putting more money back in. So like that is kind of like you throw. I, I have a tough time with the wording of the way that this was worded, but you're reinvesting back into it, and you're having success with it, and ultimately it's going to come down, your rankings in terms of 24/7 on 3, whatever you're going to use, are going to come down to a couple of those big fish, and that's where you're spending a lot of your thing. So I don't. The numbers look, I don't want to say sensational, but like that is the price of what they're doing. They have upped that, they've done that, and I think that that's certainly, you would like to see more of a return from a rankings perspective, but I don't think much has changed. A little bit more fly in private, a little bit more things that go into that, but I think that you're finding yourself in that. God, I hate this phrase, but big boy recruiting world, and
Right.
that's an expensive place to be.
But that's the investment to, I guess that's I think exactly what fans need to know is they see these large numbers and they think, okay, you're not getting a return on your money. But as you pointed out, everything got more expensive over the last 3 to 5 years. So this is a comparative increase to maintain what is the lifeblood of the program and something that is very important under James Franklin. And they have seen, I think, the class of 2024, it has potential to be great. And
Right.
they've done a great job of getting a lot of talented players into the class, even if it didn't result in a top 5 class like 2022 was. So I think it's an interesting thing to put in perspective about trying to keep pace and trying to get ahead. And, Penn State doing the best that they can in those particular areas. Not to The natural question is, okay, so what puts them ahead? Do you have any thoughts on that? Or is that just one of those things where if it happens, it's going to happen?
Unfortunately, I think if it happens, it's going to happen. Like you can do so much in traveling, you can do so much in hosting visits and bringing some kids in. And it's State College is not a cheap place to get to, so I think that plays into some of this stuff. But you get 70 official visits now or whatever, so like I think a lot of that goes into it. But at the same time, like it's one of those things that I don't think there's a formula on it, and it some places don't, I don't want to say don't have to spend, because everybody does spend, but some places don't have to spend as much to be as successful as Penn State has been.
And that's, I guess, going back to the question about number of recruiting offers you send out. And I'm going to put this back up here. What did you, without putting an exact number on it, like, is it better to be in the top 5 of offered programs, or is it better to be more selective and have a more targeted approach because you have the ability to do that? Like, is there, if Penn State does reach those levels of success, do you think they'll see less offers going out?
No, I don't think so, because Penn State is not going to change its location. It's not going to change how tough it is to get here. Hopefully, RMJ can get that airport going, but it's a situation where who's number 9 on that list? Michigan. Michigan offers a lot of kids. Michigan is in a similar situation, a little bit easier to get to Ann Arbor through Detroit than it is to get to State College. But like, you still need to have that appeal. You still need to have that sort of eye catcher, and sometimes that's what the offer is.
JC Corrigan here in the chat, and that's what I got for today, as far as the show. But there's got some interesting questions here in the chat that I want to get to. If you've got one, we've got a couple minutes here at the end of the show to discuss what's on your mind. And JC asks an interesting question. He says, how should a fan consider the balance of all the elements of fit rather than focusing on just 5 stars? A full house of jacks and 9s beats a pair of kings. Seems like a 25 class, and I'm going to limit it to just 25 so we don't have to re-adjudicate things previously. Seems like the 25 class is especially germane. What do you think of the way they're building 2025, I guess?
I think that fit is incredibly important, and it's tough to measure from a recruiting ranking standpoint. There are a lot of things that are tough to measure from a recruiting standpoint, in terms of individual, in terms of like your drive and your motivation. You can't really judge that on a high school field against guys that you're better than. Your back, like, everything goes into. I think one of the things that, like, one of these lessons that was taught to me was when I was younger. I was talking to someone about offensive linemen, and the takeaway, and this is not just limited to offensive lineman, defensive lineman, whatever, but the takeaway is, if you can afford to fail, you will. Like, if that is a situation where you need football or you don't need football, it comes out on the field. And that is not a broad brush for anything, but it is one of those things that you keep going back and you look at some of the success that Penn State's had and some of the success that Penn State has not had, and it's been along those lines. And it's been really interesting to say. So fit is extremely important when you're talking fit in a scheme. We don't go back, and this is something like I don't think we have the manpower or the ability to do. But if I would be fascinated by recruiting rankings, like post signing rankings based on scheme. Like there are guys that make a lot of sense for Penn State's scheme that don't make a lot of sense for somebody else's scheme, and that's really interesting to think about. And we don't do that. I don't think we're gonna. I mean, it'd be a heck of an idea, but it'd be even bigger undertaking. So there's that fit in terms of program. I talked about that earlier on the show. Penn State recruits a certain type of kid. Michigan recruits a certain type of kid. Notre Dame recruits a certain type of kid. Schools down south recruit a different certain type of kid. And it's not necessarily with background and things like that, but you can tell the difference. Like it's kind of how that plays out. So yes, fit is incredibly important, while balancing, on the other hand, you talk about 5 stars, you want to get the best players available. So sometimes you bring in a guy that's I don't want to say a square peg in a round hole, but like a cylinder peg in a round hole. Like sometimes it fits, sometimes it doesn't. But if he's a really, really good peg, that's
you're gonna try and force it.
Yeah, you want to get the best guys possible, but at the same time, make it fit. So fit is extremely important. I'd be fascinated to see how over the last several years, those guys that you and I talk about hey, I can really see him in Joe Moorhead's scheme, Andy Kotelnicki's scheme, Mike Yersich's scheme. The difference between a guy like Kevion Keys in Manny Diaz versus Brent Pry, like the things that work out, the little things, and it might not change the rating all that much because the player is the player, but that means a lot. That means a big difference. And it's one thing when I look at the way that college football has gone and the ability that these guys have to either play right away. So take for example a guy that Penn State adds, and Penn State has had some successful guys at the last minute, a Robert Windsor, a Daquan Hardy, things like that. But they've also taken some guys at the last minute that don't make a lot of sense because of physical potential, because of things like that. If that guy goes to Miami, Ohio, and finds the right scheme and like blows up, now all of a sudden he can go wherever he wants with the transfer portal. So I'm fascinated to look at this 2022 to 2026 window and see if there are guys that are making decisions that, hey, I'm not just going to pick the best or the best offer, quote unquote, the best offer, the biggest name or anything like that. I'm going to actually look at this and see who fits me the best. And then unfortunately, by the time that kid gets to Miami, Ohio, half their staff leaves, which Miami had a great staff last year. We're far too deep in the mud here, but they had a great staff last year and a great scheme. And now all of a sudden that all blows up. I mean, you look at this morning, Sean Elliott's going back to South Carolina. Georgia State started spring ball 2 days ago. He's the head coach. Like, what the hell are we doing here? So like that is my unhinged rambling based on that very good question.
So I think it's interesting. I'm going to quote you and say it's super early in 2025 still. But to me, just the trend I'm seeing, and it can change if they get a bunch of guys in the summer that are like, wow, look at the top end of this class, and you can see depth and strength throughout it. But right now, what I see is I see a lot of project, high end. I don't want to completely say gamble, because I think some of those guys that have high end potential, especially at tackle and offensive line, they bring a lot of things that make you confident they can hit on that. But at the same time,
used the 2 P words here, so you're already in too deep. So just go with whatever you want.
Yeah. So you've got a tackle, or excuse me, you got potential in 2025, 2024, and in 2025, I see here's a bunch of guys we think are good at football and we want to recruit and we think that are going to hit. They may not be superstars, but we think that they have the skills to produce and be. And this is always, like you get into these evaluations, like meat and potatoes type of players that you absolutely have to have on your roster, glue players that do tasks that you need.
Right.
But again, Penn State, you bringing up those guys. Garrett Sexton was a 3-star when he was recruited, and suddenly he's a top 100 player. Penn State has done a great job of identifying players that we, in the end, see the same way as this is a top 100 150, 200 player in the nation. So I think it's a little early to make those determinations, but that's kind of what I see from the wave they've started this year, as opposed to how the class last year ended.
I agree. You look at like 2023 linebacker versus 2024 linebacker, like that is exactly what you're talking about. And
Yeah.
some guys might be ready right off the cuff, more so in the earlier class there. But you might have some good players that it might take a little bit longer. Usually it happens on the offensive line, but I think that the juxtaposition between those two linebacker classes is a good. It's easier to see because you can see Egan Boyer coming in at 250, and you can see Garrett Sexton coming in at 260, and you can see Anthony Duncan the year before and say, these guys don't even look like they played the same position. This is Javen Williams, these guys. So, and that's just part of riding the wave. And it's also part of riding the region. Like Penn State has to take what is given to them in the region. Sometimes that's guys that are, multi-year projects. Sometimes that is guys that can play right away. You just never know. And that's what's, I don't want to say confusing about it, but that's also what's kind of beautiful about it is like, there's no right way to go about this.
Two more questions I've got here in the chat. I'm going to kind of edit this one from Cheng Yi back here and ask St. Joe's Prep. The relationship with that school, some trouble, no trouble, lots of trouble. How do you view the relationship with the key Philadelphia school?
I'm going to say, number one, we talked about this more on BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, and I'm going to go with a lot of trouble. Like this is a situation where you had Cam Smith, Anthony Sacca, Maxwell Roy did not include Penn State in his top 6 yesterday. And Duke is in there, which Gabe Infante, who was an analyst at Penn State, is now an assistant coach at Duke. So obviously a hat tip to him. But yeah, this is a situation where I don't see Penn State having success there. And that is something that needs to be worked on. It's the top program in the state. A lot of those guys are not in-state kids. Jersey kids, a lot of Jersey kids in there, but still, that doesn't change things. That doesn't change that this is the 5 or 6 time state champion in the last 10 years, something like that. So that's some trouble right there, and they're gonna have to work through that.
Last question is from RS, and this is a question I'm curious about. How much weight do you put in peer-to-peer recruiting? Talking about Cooper Cousins being a leader in a class for 2 straight years, but how much does that affect the final decisions for players that Penn State is targeting? How much do you put on the general idea of that recruiting tactic?
Still important, but I think it peaked maybe a cycle or 2 ago, and sort of on the downswing of that. Like we're coming down the hill now because NIL brings things that change. And if you're looking at making decision, it was great when Brendan Mann wanted to play with Garrett Sickles, like as best friends, or developing into best friends and things like that. There are a few more zeros in the equation right now, and that's going to change a lot of things. And it's great. And you want to play with guys that you like. You want to play with guys that you go into a visit and you hit it off with. And that's one thing where Penn State's been very successful on official visits, especially when they have a lot of those commits on hand that weekend. But at the same time, you've got guys that have to make a more full decision, more family decision, and more focused on that. And so I think it's still important because you want to know these guys for the next 4 or 5 years, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it may be. But at the same time, you have to make the selfish decision now. And that's not going to be based on how much you like your buddy that you met at camp.
Z-Man getting us out here. Kavion Keys adding 30 plus pounds like Rojas in less than a year is phenomenal. Some of the nuggets coming out of Winter Media Day, we'll be talking about those over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. So great times to subscribe to the site, to the YouTube channel. It's free all the time. But if you are here with us right now, you're watching the show, we appreciate you supporting us wherever you do, and we want to give you a gift, and that is an extra month of trying out the site to see if you want to go all in on recruiting and basketball, football, film study, all that stuff. $1 for 2 months. Normally you just get $1, but if you're listening to the podcast or you're here on the YouTube channel, we love you. PSU1 is the code to use when signing up. You get 2 months for just $1. Thank you so much, Fitz, for coming in and doing an awesome job. This was I love these shows where we have a little bit more time, a little bit more space to dive into these topics. And Penn State recruiting and the stuff behind the scenes, I think it's just super important for fans to understand the end result. And whether or not that changes their opinion of anything going on, at least they have the information for it. And thank you for that.
You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, unfortunately. I've been doing this for a long time, so I understand that. So anyway, no, thanks to everybody for joining us. Also, check out BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. We'll go more in depth, and we're going to get Ryan back from vacation at some point and put him back to work.
All right. We will be there for all of that. And we'll have some more great content, including the wrestling show coming up tomorrow in this time slot at 10 a.m. with Greg Pickle. So stay tuned for that. And make sure if you support Blue White Illustrated, you're supporting all of our new stuff, including the Hoops podcast, which is coming out later today as well. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. I'll be back for those things. I'll talk to you later.